Studio 43 of the CBC building. It is George Stroumboulopoulos tonight for the late edition. Shall we? Welcome to the show. Good to see you today. I'm your brother, George Stroumboulopoulos. It's an honor to be with you, as always, on this fine evening. I just want to make this a little more romantic if I can. Sulk about having no boyfriend, but develop inner poise and authority and sense of self as a woman of substance, complete without boyfriend, as best way to obtain boyfriend. How exciting. Helen Fielding is going to be in the red chair tonight. Woo! That'll be awesome. Very much so looking forward to that one. You ever had one of those mornings where you just, you wake up and you're laying in bed and you're staring at your ceiling and you're thinking, I don't know if I made the right choices. You know that? And listen, you probably are from time to time that person, but you don't want to show it because oftentimes you're talking about the person laying next to you in the bed, right? Or maybe you like the person next to you, but you feel like you chose the wrong career. Or maybe you wake up and you realize, oh my goodness, I live in a state that allegedly colludes with the superpower neighbor to illegally spy on people, possibly heads of state without a warrant or just cause, but with the presumed knowledge and consent of a prime minister apparently obsessed with the word accountability, even though you have to wonder why the honorable member from Calgary Southwest doesn't seem to think it applies to him. You ever had one of those days? Yeah, me too. Let's deal with the day, shall we? Interesting, huh? Interesting, huh? Oh my goodness. Gold medalist. Oh my goodness. I really feel sorry for the person who has to set the type because they clearly ran out of U's at the wrong time and spelled my name wrong. Listen, I'm very honored to be named Toronto's, GTA's sexiest man. But they didn't use my, no, wait, they didn't use the picture. The Toronto Sun has a picture of me on file. That's no, that's not the picture from that. That's the picture I give out to charities. No, there's another picture that they had that they just chose not to use, and I find that very concerning, everybody. You know why not everybody laughed? Because some of them got turned on. Hey, you know what they say, once you go Centaur, you never want for any more. Listen, I'm completely surprised and humbled by the readers by making me the GTA sexiest person. I was completely unprepared for this. Can you guys meet me on the thank you cam for just a second? When I was growing up, I had dreams, two dreams. One was to win a gold medal and two was to be a sunshine boy. And I realized that while technically neither of those things have actually happened with this award, I'd like to paraphrase the Sun News Network by saying, close enough. Thank you to my mom, even though she disagrees with my choices. Thank you to Jesus for distracting my mom about my choices. And to Roz Weston from Kiss 92.5 and ET Canada, nothing to be ashamed of in third. You're a handsome man. Bronze is wonderful. Just ask Ben Mulrooney. And to Kevin Frankish, listen, you would have won if most of the readers were up before noon and they would have had you, all right? Time for inclusion.
What about us? What about us? What about us? What about us?
What about us? Canada loves to be included in everything. We're like that kid. We're like the kid. What about us? What about us? What about us? How come everybody else gets to spy on everybody? How come we don't get to spy on everybody? Yeah, technically we spied on Brazil, but it's Brazil. Is that really spying? How come America doesn't want to spy with us? Well, guess what? We're part of the party. Thank you to all those top secret documents that Edward Snowden released. Now we know that the American National Security Agency, much of them, turned their Ottawa embassy into a spy command center during the G8, G20 summit in 2010. And guess what? You're not allowed. They cannot spy on visitors to Canada, nor can they ask anyone else to do it for us. It's illegal. It's bad. And there we were. Apparently, up to the top, Canada knew what the Americans were doing because we're a good friend. We're a loyal friend. We're like man's or woman's best friend. We're like a dog, or in this case, like a lap dog. Between this and Brazil, we show where we stand on things like law-abiding and accountability. The word is this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? The NSA is apparently terrified that Snowden has a doomsday cache of files that he hasn't dropped yet. Way to nail the not accountability thing in this fine country, huh? Speaking of, the Prime Minister loved accountability, campaigned on accountability. His whole thing was about accountability. In fact, it goes back to before he was even in office. You may remember this honest conversation he had with stilted paid actors.
How is it that hundreds of millions of dollars go missing and no one's in jail?
Well, look who's in charge. I mean, these guys can't even tell the difference between right and wrong.
Okay, we've got a question.
It's like you get to Ottawa and no one can touch you. How will you change that?
You change the people in charge, but you also have to change the system. The first thing I'll do is pass the Federal Accountability Act. It's a real plan to clean up government.
Stand up for Canada.
That's a really good idea, the idea of bringing accountability in by changing the rules, changing the laws. Okay, that's so interesting. So let's find out what the federal guidelines were when Prime Minister Harper became Prime Minister. What did he inherit? Well, there was something called the Accountable Government, a guide for ministers and secretaries of state. So here's what it said. It said that ministers were responsible for their department, including the actions of all officials under their management and direction, whether or not the ministers had prior knowledge. Wow, that's pretty tough. But I guess this guy here, Mr. Prime Minister, wanted to make that even tougher. So let's see what he did. Yeah, guess what he did? Thanks to the Globe and Mail, something the Harper government did in 2011, a tweak of the language. They tweaked the language. No big deal, right? Here's how it reads now. Ministerial accountability to Parliament does not mean that a minister is presumed to have knowledge of every matter, nor that the minister is necessarily required to accept blame for every matter. Oh, yes, the buck stops somewhere else. I hold the office of the Prime Minister in incredibly high esteem. That's why, when we break rules, it's worth the anger. But I don't want to get so down. Don't want to get so depressed. I like to listen to things that make me feel happy. Jaunty music helps me feel happy. Can you want to hear a song? Can we play a song? It's world music by Senior Stevie and Los Acantablos.
Honesty, integrity, and accountability. To replace a culture of entitlement with a commitment to accountability. The changes we're going to make to the operation of the federal government to improve accountability.
I will clean up government by passing the Federal Accountability Act. Accountability was our first priority. Canada now has a cleaner, more accountable government. We adopted the most sweeping anti-corruption law in Canadian history, the Federal Accountability Act.
We must also uphold a culture of accountability.
We expect appropriate action to be taken to ensure accountability.
But I would expect that action will be taken to ensure full accountability for any breaking of rules.
I think that song has a really strong finish, don't you? Doesn't matter who's in power. Actually, we only ever elect one of two parties to run this country. Doesn't matter who's in power. After you're in there for a handful of years, these stories always come out. By the way, speaking of stories, what do you think was the most viewed story of the day on CBC.ca? This one right here. Smoking greens in my reds. I want to be sensitive to people with PTSD, and that officer smokes it. It's medicinal marijuana. He's legally allowed to smoke marijuana. His bosses would rather he didn't do it while he was wearing the uniform or on the job. People are going, look, man, you're allowed to take your antidepressants if you're working, which is totally fair. But there are certain medications you shouldn't do certain things with, like operate heavy machinery. And an RCMP, what could be a heavier machine than a horse? That's your debrief. So, before we go anywhere, I want to tell you a regular right here on our panel is a guy called Pat Thornton. Tomorrow night in Toronto at the Comedy Bar, Pat Thornton is doing 24 hours of non-stop stand-up comedy. He is on stage for 24 straight hours for the Stephen Lewis Foundation's DARE campaign. You've got to see it, especially late at night. It gets super weird. I'll be there. Fraser, who works on our show, will be there. Many people from our team will be there to support Pat Thornton and the Stephen Lewis Foundation. Plus, when you're on stage for 24 straight hours, you've earned the right to get weird.